Welcome, everybody. I'm going to ask our speakers to also turn on their videos as we begin the session. Thank you for joining the session titled Young Farmers and Food Systems Transformations, Struggles and Opportunities Towards a Globalized Youth Response. My name is Tyler Short, and I'm going to be moderating today's discussion. I'm from Kentucky in the so-called USA. I have a master's degree in cultural anthropology, and I've been farming and engaging in food sovereignty activism since 2015. When the COVID-19 pandemic began, I started working full-time on a family farm that produces vegetables, meat, and flowers for local markets. And I also have direct land access on the farm for my own subsistence production. I'm a third-year member of the board of directors for Family Farm Defenders, through which I'm organized in the Youth Articulation and the Public Policies Collective of the International Peasant Movement, La Via Campesina. In addition, I'm one of the representatives of La Via Campesina on the Coordination Committee of the Civil Society and Indigenous Peoples Mechanism, the CSIPM, an autonomous and essential part of the United Nations Committee on World Food Security, the CFS. Now, we're going to have a round of introductions from our speakers who are youth activists from 4 different regions of La Via Campesina: the Caribbean, Europe, North America, and South Asia.
Hi, everybody. It's good to be here. My name's Jessie MacInnis, and I use she, her pronouns. I'm joining you today from Gesbukwitik, Mi'kma'ki, the land of the Mi'kmaq, also known as Nova Scotia in Eastern Canada. I'm a small-scale agroecological farmer, and I grow organic vegetables and flowers with my sister on our farm, which is called Springtide Farm. We do a community-supported agriculture program and sell to a local farmers market. And I've been organizing with the National Farmers Union of Canada for about 6 years, and the NFU is a founding member of La Via Campesina. Currently, with regard to La Via, I'm an active member of the International Peasants' Rights Collective, and lately I've been collaboratively producing popular education materials with the goal of advancing knowledge dissemination around the UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants and other people working in rural areas. I'm also part of the Regional Youth Articulation along with Tyler. And this is my 2nd year as the youth president of the National Farmers Union. And this year we are putting a strong emphasis on building our grassroots base and advancing our equitable agriculture policy in Canada for new farmers and farm workers. And my role as a youth leader in the NFU is really what drew me towards La Via Campesina, and also the Civil Society and Indigenous Peoples Mechanism Youth Working Group, which is how I met many of the comrades that are joining me today. Thanks.
Thanks, Jessie. Micherline, Islanda, could you introduce yourself?
Hello everyone. My apologies, I'm outside, I'm actually working. Please forgive me for the quality of my video. So my name is Micherline Islanda Aduel. I'm from Haiti, and I work for Tête Collée, which is a local organization here in Haiti, and I also have links to La Via Campesina. And so I plant a lot of yams. That is my main culture, or my main production here. And I represent young people within the Via Campesina for the Latin American region. And so the work of the Via Campesina and the work of these farmers falls within our domain of activity, and young people are in fact the future of this movement. And that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Islanda. Jean, could you introduce yourself, please?
Oui, bien sûr, merci Tyler.
Yes,
Bonjour
thank
à
you,
toutes et à
Tyler.
tous. Je m'appelle
Hello,
Jean
everyone. My
Thévenot, je
name is
suis
Jean,
paysan dans le Pays
and
Basque, dans
I'm
le
a peasant
sud-ouest
in the
de la
Basque
France, donc
country
le
in
Pays
the
Basque,
southwest of
une région, on va
France,
dire, semi-autonome d'Europe.
which is a semi-autonomous
Je
region, we shall say, in
suis
Europe.
producteur de plants maraîchers bio.
I
Donc, je
am
produis
a
des plants
producer
de légumes
of
à destination de maraîchers professionnels ou de
ecologically
jardiniers
friendly
qui
and
ont leur
organic
jardin chez eux. Voilà, j'ai décidé
vegetables.
de devenir producteur de plants parce que pour
And
moi,
so I
c'est un
became
premier pas vers
a
la souveraineté
producer of
alimentaire
these sort of
des
saplings and
citoyens
young plants
et
because I
des
thought it
gens
was
qui
very
font partie du
useful
monde
to kind of
rural
engage with a
de
lot
mon
of
pays.
citizens
Donc
who
l'idée, c'est de
wanted
leur fournir des
to
plants pour leur permettre
work
eux-mêmes
in this
de produire
sector,
une partie, en tout cas,
especially in my
de leur
country,
alimentation.
and
En dehors de
allow
ça,
these
je fais
people
partie
to
donc de
improve
la
their
Confédération paysanne,
the way
qui est
they
le
eat. I'm
syndicat
also part
français
of the
membre de
Peasant
la Via
Confederation,
Campesina
which is
au niveau
a trade
français.
union, a French trade union, which is part of La Via
Je fais partie de
Campesina.
l'articulation jeunesse
And I'm
au
also
niveau de la
part
Via
of
Campesina
the
Europe, de
youth
la coordination européenne de Via
articulation,
Campesina,
excuse me,
et
of
au
La Via
niveau de
Campesina
la
at the
coordination des jeunes de
European
la Via
level.
Campesina internationale.
And I also
Voilà,
work
dans ces
within
différentes
the youth
articulations,
coordination
on
of
mène
La
un
Via
certain nombre de
Campesina on
travaux, à la fois de
international level.
relais
So
et de
we've been
réflexion
doing
sur
quite a
des
lot of
campagnes que
work.
je
I'm
menais à
doing
la
quite a lot bit
Campesina
of
en général, mais
coordination with
aussi
these
sur des campagnes plus
organizations.
spécifiques
And we've also been working on
sur
more
des enjeux plus
specific
liés aux
campaigns,
jeunes paysans que nous sommes.
especially
Donc voilà,
questions linked
effectivement,
to
d'accès au
young
foncier ou aux ressources
peasants and
productives, des questions
farmers, which we
d'installation, de
are. So
renouvellement générationnel,
we've been
etc.
talking a lot about the renewal of
Voilà, et
the
puis on travaille
professional, these
aussi,
kinds
enfin,
of
personnellement,
questions.
un peu comme Jessie, je travaille pas mal sur la question de l'INDROP, la
I've also
Déclaration universelle
been
des droits des paysans, qui est une grande
working
victoire de
on
la Campesina ces
peasants' rights
dernières
more
années, que l'on
broadly,
essaye actuellement de mettre en avant et
and
de
we've been
rendre un peu plus
trying
contraignant au
to
niveau international. Voilà,
emphasize
et je
these
suis
questions on
très
an
heureux d'être
international
ici avec
level.
vous aujourd'hui pour cette
So
session
I'm very
qui, je
happy to
l'espère,
be here
va
today and to be able
très
to
enrichissante.
participate in this session, which is going to be very enriching.
Thank you, Jean. Qammar, could you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Tyler. Hello, everyone. My name is Qammar Abbas, and I am joining from Pakistan, Lahore. And I'm a part of peasant and left movement in Pakistan. And I am also a graduate student of agriculture sciences from University of the Punjab, Lahore. And I'm working and organizing as a youth representative with Pakistan Farmers Coordination Committee. And from PKRC, I'm also a part of La Via Campesina in South Asia region. And I'm mostly participating in youth articulation of South Asia and Asia region of La Via Campesina. I am also working and organizing in different global spaces like civil society and indigenous peoples mechanism and International Planning Committee of Food Sovereignty, IPC, and quite active in their youth groups. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for being here today and being willing to share your perspectives and your knowledge. I also really want to thank our audience members for your interest in this session, as well as to the conference organizers and the interpreters for the logistical support. As you all give your interventions as we proceed, just please keep in mind to speak slowly for the interpreters. So we're here today to really make a clear message that youth are the future of food systems, and we're trying to build the solutions right now. Youth in the food sovereignty movement, we need more spaces like this conference to bring together a wide diversity of people around common goals, specifically the transformation of food and agricultural systems. But it's really important to ask, what kind of transformation are we aiming for? And what principles are guiding our daily work? What tools do we have to work with now? And what roles do youth have in this work? So you're going to hear from our 4 speakers who are young people in La Via Campesina, who are also extremely eager to learn from each other and share our experiences related to food production, to grassroots organizing and policy advocacy. In our struggle to defend peasants' rights and construct food sovereignty, we really want to emphasize that it's necessary to build strategic alliances across social movements to fight racism and fight colonialism and fight patriarchy. We're trying to build popular power toward climate justice and for the protection of workers' rights, the rights of migrants and indigenous peoples, women's rights, and the rights of people who have been historically discriminated against based on their sexual orientation or gender identity. So public dialogues like this conference are crucial for us to continue raising awareness, to connect with allies, and to massify the social movement for food sovereignty. La Via Campesina, founded 30 years ago, and we currently have 182 member organizations in 81 countries, representing more than 200 million peasants and workers. Core issues that led to the development of the international food sovereignty movement remain extremely relevant and at the top of our political agenda today, including the topics of external debt, international trade, and environmental protection. Agroecology, gender equality, women's rights, and agrarian reform are also extremely central to our work. Youth in La Via Campesina are raising these banners of struggle in mass mobilizations, communications campaigns, and in political education processes. We're also advancing our movement's demands and policy negotiations and advocacy efforts across United Nations spaces. We have asserted that food sovereignty is the right of peoples to define their own food and agricultural systems. Food sovereignty is our right to healthy and culturally appropriate food produced through ecologically sound and sustainable methods. Food sovereignty puts the aspirations and the needs of those who produce, distribute, and consume food at the heart of food systems policies and programs, rather than the demands of markets and corporations. So now we're going to discuss what the struggle for food sovereignty looks like in different contexts around the world. We're going to focus on longstanding as well as emerging problems that young people face in agriculture, such as land and market inequities, as well as more recent threats that are related to climate change and digitalization. We're also going to discuss examples of public policies that could protect the rights of peasants and the rights of consumers, as well as various policy approaches that could foster the democratization of food systems. So the format of today's session includes two main parts. The first hour is going to involve rounds of questions to our four speakers. And I would just like to remind you all to try and keep your interventions to a maximum of 3 minutes during each round. And then during the last 30 minutes, we're going to have a Q&A with the audience. And this is going to take place in a separate room. The conference organizers will post a Zoom link for audience members to join that Q&A. And so throughout the session, we encourage everybody in the audience to submit your questions to our speakers. And if relevant, please identify which speaker you would like to address your question. So we're going to get into it. Islanda, you're up first. We're really eager to hear from you about the current political and economic situation in Haiti. And if you could identify some of the main impacts of the current crisis on peasants and workers, especially young people. Islanda, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you again, Tyler. So to tell you a bit more about the situation in Haiti, I need to start by saying that Haiti is facing an unprecedented crisis, and especially a dysfunction of state power. During the last 6 years, no election has been organized to facilitate the renewal of the political power, be that at national or local level. And so we have a state that cannot function properly because of insecurity and the lack of renewal of this legislative personnel. And the situation has become worse daily after the assassination of the former president in July 2022. This institutional crisis linked to other crises, especially that of food sovereignty, has really caused a real deterioration of living conditions of the population. And this often happens to the profit of the local bourgeoisie. And so sugar is exploited to make stevia or Coca-Cola. And we're also seeing quite a lot of land grabbing to organize mining exploitation. So certain permits have been delivered, allowing these corporations to come in. And so our peasants are really living this. And so we're seeing that the government is handing out the ancestral lands of these people to then make them into commercially exploited zones. And so these peasants are now becoming agricultural workers on their ancestral lands, as opposed to people with a link to that land. And so peasants are dealing with an illegitimate and illegal government that is doing nothing to solve the situation and is only making it worse. And facing this deterioration of the security climate in the country, the population has been seeing with a lot of indignation and anger the decision of the illegitimate and de facto prime minister, who was nominated last year in July. And he has been asking for military intervention, a foreign military intervention to face this humanitarian crisis. After this decree, which was published by the government, the foreign occupation has been called to favor a reestablishment of the state of right, to create a restarting of economic activity. However, it's not true. In reality, what they want to do is to politically profit from the chaos that this core group has made. So the Canadian, the US, the French embassies, the chaos that these organizations have created, and has now forced the country to ask for a military occupation. This is contrary to the Haitian constitution. And facing this environmental crisis that is threatening humanity, sovereignty is also threatened in Haiti, not only food sovereignty, but the sovereignty of an independent people who claim that independence. And in fact, in last January, we celebrated the 219th anniversary of the Haitian Revolution, through which we won that independence. And so this gives you an overview of the situation and how bad it's getting. And recently, the First Lady has said and has federated armed gangs in the country to cause terror in Haiti. So we are technically a peaceful country, but with the presence of this core group formed by different embassies that I mentioned earlier. And this First Lady is also part of the core group. And she is the one who federated these armed forces. And she clearly stated this in a memo that was sent to the UN. So that is what I can tell you about the situation in the country. So these are the actors who created chaos in Haiti.
Thank you so much, Islanda. We're going to get back to your local context and how your organization is struggling for food sovereignty in the next round of questions, but you identified some major problems that you all are facing there with land grabbing and exploitation of people and environment. So I'm going to pass it over to Jean. Like, how do you experience those problems in Europe? Maybe if you could also talk specifically about the digitalization of agriculture and various approaches to protect people's rights against corporate capture. Jean?
Oui. Alors,
Yes.
d'abord pour réagir un petit peu à ce que disait
So
Micherline,
firstly, I just want to react to
on est
something
tout à fait
that
conscient
Micherline was
de
saying.
la situation. On reviendra
We're
plus
very
tard
much
dessus
aware of
dans
that
cette
situation,
séance
and we'll come back to
aujourd'hui
it, I
sur
hope, later in this
l'importance de la
session,
solidarité internationale
on
entre les
the
peuples
importance of international
Et voilà, d'avoir bien
solidarity between
conscience que
peoples and
les
between
politiques des
peasant movements.
gouvernements, que ce soit en
And
Haïti,
we
en France ou
are
ailleurs,
aware
suivent des intérêts qui ne sont pas les nôtres quand il
the fact
s'agit
that
de peuples
governments
et de paysans.
often
Et c'est très
follow
important pour
interests
nous
that
de,
are
voilà,
not
de
ours and
démarquer
are
et de
certainly not
proposer aussi une
those of the
alternative.
population
Et c'est toujours
or
enfin,
of
c'est quelque
the
chose qui est
peasantry.
important et qui fait une des forces de la
And we
dette
think
aussi
that
au niveau
that's very
international aujourd'hui, c'est
important, and
justement
that's
que
why
l'on n'est
we're
pas que dans
working
une position
within
critique du
La
système
Via
actuel,
Campesina.
mais on propose une
We're
vraie
not only
alternative qui est la
criticizing
souveraineté
the
alimentaire, qui est une alternative à la fois
current system, we're
sociale,
proposing a
politique,
proper
éthique, humaine,
alternative,
tout ce que
which
vous voulez,
is food
qui est
sovereignty, which
une proposition
incorporates all these
concrète et
different facets,
réaliste pour l'avenir
humanist
de l'humanité.
and concrete.
Voilà,
And
alors
this
je
is
reviens
a real
justement un
solution
petit
for the
instant là-dessus,
future
en dehors des
of
gouvernements qui ont leur
humanity, I
agenda,
think.
malheureusement, on sait qu'aujourd'hui, l'agenda de ces
And
multinationales
we know that
est quand
these
même clairement
governments
défini
have
et
agendas,
influencé
and these
par
agendas
les
are
multinationales,
defined and
les multinationales de tout genre.
influenced by an international
Et dans le
elite.
monde agricole, évidemment, par les multinationales
And
de
in the
l'agriculture, que ce soit les
agricultural
grandes compagnies
world,
semencières, les grandes compagnies
we're seeing
agricoles, les
that
grandes compagnies
represented
agroalimentaires,
through
qui
big
influencent fortement les
multinational
gouvernements et les
corporations in
politiques
the sector
internationales.
linked to seed
Nous, à la
distribution,
Via Campesina,
agricultural
ce qu'on a
production,
défendu,
etc.
d'ailleurs on a parlé un
And
petit peu tout à l'heure,
within our
c'est
organization,
la logique de l'ONU, donc la logique où tout
we
État
found
a droit à un vote et
the
prend l'avis
UN logic
des
saying
peuples
that every
en
state
question.
has a
Évidemment, les
vote.
multinationales n'aiment pas du tout ça, d'autant plus qu'au niveau de la
And
FAO,
these
la Via
corporations
Campesina
really
et
don't
ses
like
alliés
this
ont réussi à obtenir
principle.
il y a quelques
And
années
so
donc,
the
une sorte de
FAO and
groupe
the
de
Vida
travail
Campesina
dans
has
lequel on
been able to
peut
achieve
activement participer
a
aux échanges
working group
internationaux sur
within
ces
which
questions
we
d'Afrique
can
agricole
actively
mondiale. Et ça
participate
dérange
in these
beaucoup les
international
compagnies
exchanges.
multinationales qui
And
essaient de
this has
sortir
given
de
a
ce
lot of
cadre
problems to these
multilatéral
multinational
habituel de l'ONU
companies
pour
who
rentrer
have
dans ce qu'ils
tried to
appellent
kind
le
of extract us or
multi-stakeholderism en anglais, donc le multi-acteurisme
cut
en
us out
français, qui
of
serait un espèce
these
de système où en fait les
conversations and
multinationales
create a system
auraient
which is
leur place finalement une place
multi-stakeholderism,
prépondérante dans la définition des
in
politiques
which
internationales au niveau
these
agricole. Mais ça, c'est un
international
gros problème pour
corporations
nous et
would
on lutte
be
fortement pour ça,
accorded
notamment il y a quelques années
equal
le sommet
standing,
des
so to
systèmes
speak,
alimentaires à New
with
York que
other
la
voices.
Campesina et ses partenaires ont
And
boycotté
that's a major issue
pour
for
dénoncer
us,
le
and
fait
that's
justement que
why
c'est une initiative
we
du
have
monde privé des
boycotted
entreprises
these
et de Davos qu'on
multi-stakeholder
ne reconnaissait absolument pas.
meetings
Là où on
because
voit
we do not
une poussée
agree
assez
with the
forte à
fundamental
l'heure actuelle
basis.
donc dans ces instances internationales de la part des
And today,
multinationales,
what we're
c'est
seeing
sur la
and
question
this
des nouvelles
pressure that's
technologies.
coming
Tout le
from
monde commence à avoir conscience que
multinational
l'agriculture
companies, and
industrielle
this is particularly
est
important in
absolument
the
catastrophique
sector
à tous les
of
niveaux, pour
new
l'environnement, pour les
technologies.
humains, en termes alimentaires.
And
Voilà,
this is
ça ne produit
being
pas
hailed
d'aliments,
as
des aliments malsains, ça produit des
a
agrocarburants, donc ça
solution,
nuit aux
but
personnes.
in fact, it actually
Voilà, et
doesn't
donc il y a de
create
plus en
a
plus
healthy
de
food.
prise de conscience de cette réalité. Et du coup, la
And so
solution
we've
proposée par les multinationales pour
become
faire face à
aware
ce problème,
of
c'est
this issue.
les nouvelles technologies. C'est-à-dire qu'avec des robots, des
And
drones, des
now
logiciels,
with
et la
robots,
digitalisation de l'agriculture, on va
drones,
pouvoir régler ce
software,
problème.
etc., we're
Nous, on pense que ce
supposedly
n'est pas
going
le
to be
cas.
able
Et
to
la
deal with these
digitalisation, c'est une
problems linked
fuite en
to
avant qui va permettre de
food
maintenir le
production.
système agricole
But
mondial actuel
we
au
disagree
lieu
with
de
this. We
changer.
think that
Et
it's
nous, on
going
défend
to
l'agroécologie,
be
l'agroécologie paysanne et la souveraineté
a
alimentaire
change that, in
complètement
fact, is
différente.
going
Et
to
évidemment, ce
maintain the
modèle-là ne plaît pas aux
status quo
transnationales, donc elle
and
propose
maintain the
cette idée
model that
de
is
digitalisation
currently
agricole
not
qui est censée
working.
être bénéfique pour l'environnement.
And so
Donc, quand on
this
regarde le coût
agricultural
environnemental, déjà de cette
digitalization that is
technologie, que
supposed
ce
to
soit
be
la
good for the
fabrication
environment
de ces
is,
outils
in
qui
fact,
utilisent
has a
beaucoup de
very
métaux, de
high
terres rares,
environmental
etc., ou
cost.
leur utilisation qui consomme énormément d'énergie, on se rend
It's
compte qu'en fait,
not
déjà,
very energy
c'est
efficient.
absolument pas quelque chose qui est bon
So
pour
we're
la planète.
seeing that
Mais en
actually
plus,
this
c'est un pas en
digitalization is
avant
not
encore plus
good
loin dans la
for the
dépossession
planet,
des
but it's
paysans
also
de
a
leur outil de
step
travail, de
forward
leurs terres, de leur
in
village. Puisqu'une
dispossessing
fois qu'une ferme est
peasants
digitalisée, ben, en
from
fait, les
their
compagnies
work
transnationales
and from
contrôlent
their
toute la
land.
production de la ferme.
But once the
Et les paysans,
production
finalement,
is
deviennent quelque de
digitalized,
salariés, je
you're
dirais, au mieux,
disconnecting the
d'esclaves au
worker
pire,
from the
de ces
actual work.
compagnies-là. Ils ne peuvent plus rien faire par eux-mêmes puisque ces
And
logiciels ne leur
that
appartiennent
makes
pas.
the
Et
workers
on est en fait dans la
completely
même logique que
dependent
celle
on
des semences
the
OGM, mais
technology and the companies that
à une échelle
produces it.
vraiment plus globale, quoi. Et je finirai
And
pour
that
donner
is
un
going
exemple
to
concret
happen on a
du fait que
global
voilà,
scale. And I'll
Monsanto, ils ont
finish
avancé il y a
with
quelques
a
années qu'ils
concrete
avaient
example.
conscience que les semences
So a
étaient
few
leur cœur
years
de
ago,
business actuel, mais
Monsanto
que l'avenir de leur entreprise,
were
c'était les données et
aware
la
of the fact
digitalisation.
that
Voilà. Et on voit
they
maintenant
had a
Google,
huge
les GAFAM, Amazon, etc. rentrer dans cette
hold on
histoire
the
comme
business just
avec
through
évidemment des
their
intérêts
seed business, but
économiques
they
très
actually
importants.
had already understood years
Voilà,
ago
je passe la parole
that their
à la suite.
control would then be maintained through digitalization. And that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Jean. Jessie, we're going to hear from you now on, so we're addressing some of these big issues that young people are facing in agriculture. So if you could also maybe touch on some of the key problems that youth in Canada are facing, especially with regard to land access and maybe market access too. Jessie?
Thanks, Tyler, and thanks so much, Jean and Islanda as well for your comments and thoughts. I want to start with a kind of sobering statistic about young people who farm in Canada, which is that over the last 25 years, there's been a 70% decline in the number of farmers under the age of 34. Combined with this, from conversations I've had with young and aspiring farmers and farm workers, and a major research survey that the National Farmers Union did with some academic researchers in 2015, the major reason for this is that there's a massive lack of affordable access to farmland and high upfront capital costs. So of course, there are other key concerns that can't be undermined and have to be considered in the intersectional struggle for food sovereignty. And I think we, in this, all the other speakers can relate that farm workers, labor rights, the climate crisis, Indigenous sovereignty, these are all key concerns, but in terms of actually getting on the land and producing food, accessing good farmland is key. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. And so with the fact that the number of young farmers is declining, we are facing a generational crisis in Canada. The average age of farmers based on last year's national census is that the average age is currently 56. And this keeps climbing every time they do a new census survey of all the farmers across the country. So the majority of farmers are reaching retirement age, yet because of income squeezing over the last decades, beginning with the expansion of neoliberal trade policies, and now with the high costs of production, many farmers resort to selling their farms at market rates in order to attempt to retire with dignity, despite having low incomes, often throughout their careers as farmers. And these costs are, frankly, unaffordable for new and aspiring farmers who are trying to break into agriculture, especially those outside the intergenerational family farm model. Many new farmers don't have credit histories or capital available to make large investments in high-priced farmland and machinery, and especially those from urban areas, those without intergenerational wealth, newcomers to the country, and second-generation immigrants, Indigenous youth, racialized youth. There are very, very few farm succession supports at the provincial level, and even fewer that are supported by government funding. So this is one key issue. On the flip side of this, which I mentioned at the beginning, retiring farmers want to earn a dignified retirement income. So they put their farms on the market, and when they do so, this farmland is often scooped by speculative investors looking to capitalize on the value of productive farmland. So now we're seeing huge tracts of farmland, particularly in the Canadian prairies, which is where the bulk of agricultural production happens in the country, being owned by major investment funds, some of which some of you may have heard of before, such as BlackRock, Vanguard, even teacher pension plans from other provinces are scooping up farmland in the Canadian prairies. So what's happening is that farmland stewardship is being replaced by absentee landlordism, and the financialization of farmland has led to immense corporate concentration. So I would be remiss if I didn't also mention the racial inequity component, which is that Canada is a settler colonial country, and the agriculture sector, frankly, was built by and for European settlers who were recruited to settle productive lands. So meanwhile, Indigenous peoples, Black people, people of color were and continue to be exploited for their labor in the food system. So inevitably, that means that ongoing systemic racism is deeply rooted into Canadian agriculture and also deeply rooted in who gets to access farmland first. So in the next 10 to 15 years, there's going to be a massive turnover in farmland tenure, one way or another. This land staying in the hands of those who want to produce food is contingent on the accessibility and affordability of land to new farmers from all backgrounds. So this is something that in the National Farmers Union, we've been working on, especially the Youth Caucus has been working on to collectively identify how we at the regional and national level take the government to task to ensure an agriculture policy that better reflects our needs and that better reflects food sovereignty. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you, Jessie. Qammar, if you could maybe address some of the key problems that you all are facing there as youth in Pakistan. especially the effects of the climate crisis. If you can maybe share a little bit about how you all responded during the recent flooding, Qammar?
Yeah, thank you, Tyler. It is, as everyone know, that Pakistan is one of the country that is producing less than 1% of the world carbon emissions. But it is one of the countries bearing the brunt of climate crisis. And for the past 20 years, it has constantly been listed in the Global Climate Risk Index as one of the most 10 vulnerable countries in the world. And Pakistan and the whole of the South Asian countries are nowadays facing a very high climate risk, and all South Asian countries are the hotspots of climate crisis. And this year, as everyone know, there's a extreme monsoon rain in Pakistan, and breaking the national 30-year rainfall record in Pakistan. Monsoon rains induced floods in Pakistan, and these floods affected almost 33 to 40 million people. And it is like wiping out agricultural lands, livestock assets, forests, and critical agricultural infrastructure. Rural communities who represent 80% of the poorest people in Pakistan and depend on agriculture and livestock keeping for their livelihoods were among the hardest hit by this disaster this year, the floods. And as a preliminary estimate of the provincial and national governments, around 6.5 million acres of standing crops of summer season have been affected badly during the flooding. And the most affected agricultural crops are rice and cotton of that time, and almost half of the country's cotton crop has been wiped out. The cotton crop in all the provinces have been severely affected. Similarly, mango and orchards and chili farms in all provinces and all areas in Pakistan are also flooded. And this is a very serious a catastrophe for small farmers and peasants, especially in Pakistan. And it is a very extreme humanitarian crisis this year. Almost 2,000 people are died due to this flooding, including 600 to 700 children, and additional almost 20,000 people were injured. And 1 million houses are totally or partially damaged, leaving millions of people in need of urgent shelter. More than 50 million people were displaced from their homes due to this flood. And as a peasant and small farmers movement, Pakistan Farmers Coordination Committee take part in this worsened humanitarian situation and crisis, and help the farmers and small farmers, peasants through different ways. We donate food, we donate clothes and different things, because people are totally out of their homes. They have no place to go, and it is because Pakistan is totally in debt, and the funding to do this is very less. So we need to address these issues, and the most important issue is loss and damage fund and climate justice issues. Due to the debt situation, Pakistan is very under debt, and due to the imperialism and IMF, WTO policies, Pakistani people are suffering, and the whole South Asian region is suffering. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Qammar, and thanks everybody for sharing your inputs on this first round. It's emerging, that there's a lot of common problems that we face with regard to the climate crisis and the loss of democracy in food systems. But there's particular problems that we also face in our various local and national contexts. So as we keep moving in the conversation, let's sort of try and transition as we face these giant problems. What are we doing to resist? What are the solutions that we're building to actually realize food sovereignty and climate justice? So I'm going to pass it over to Jean and then Islanda. Jean, if maybe you could address a little bit more about digitalization and policies that could protect the rights of peasants against the corporate capture of food systems.
Yes, sure. So that will link a little. Excusez-moi, il faut que je parle en français et que je me mette en français. Je disais oui, du coup, ça va faire le lien avec ce que je disais tout à l'heure. Donc, j'ai parlé un peu plus de l'aspect des technologies, mais d'une manière générale, on observe que les compagnies multinationales depuis très longtemps, mais en particulier depuis une vingtaine d'années, je dirais,
particularly in the last
ont
20
eu une volonté
years, I
forte
would
d'entrer
say,
dans le secteur
have
agricole pour des raisons inhérentes au
an
capitalisme. Le
interest
capitalisme
in
a toujours
going
besoin de
into
nouveaux
the
marchés.
agricultural
Donc,
sector
la finance est entrée dans le monde agricole
obvious
il y a un peu
reasons,
plus
so that
longtemps, ça. Et puis là, ce qu'on voit maintenant, c'est qu'ils essaient de rentrer dans le monde
enter the
de ce
agricultural
qu'ils appellent les solutions basées sur la nature et un certain nombre de projets de compensation carbone,
solutions
de
based on
que l'on voit qui sont
nature
en fait ne
and
sont que
carbon
des produits modélisés.
trading and this type of
On en a beaucoup
solutions
entendu parler à la
that
COP en Égypte,
have
de
been
le
presented.
net zéro,
We've
donc c'est des
been
projets de
talking
soi-disant
a
compenser
lot
les
at the
émissions
COP
carbone
meetings,
en
at the
développant des
net
projets
zero
en général dans les pays
objectives
dits
by
des Sud,
developing
aussi dans les pays
projects
du
and
Nord,
mostly in the global
avec des projets
south
de plantation d'arbres industriels, des choses comme ça, qui seraient censés compenser des émissions de CO2.
through
Et on
agro-industrial
voit bien donc, à la lumière
solutions.
de tout
And
ça,
so we can
l'importance d'un
see through
contrôle
all
public
this
et
the
tactique
importance of a
de
public
cette jungle
state
internationale et
control
un contrôle
of
donc sur les volontés, les
these
velléités de ces
initiatives
entreprises et de ces
and
acteurs privés.
to also be able to
La Via Campesina a toujours
control the
été un
activities
mouvement qui se
of
revendique
the
en
private
faveur des
sector.
politiques
Our
publiques, que ce soit
movement
au niveau
has
régional,
always been
national ou
in favor
international,
of public
de
policy,
politiques publiques qui défendent les
public
citoyens et en
policies that
particulier dans notre
defend
cas les
the
paysans
citizens
contre
and
des acteurs économiques
peasants
souvent très importants
against
et très puissants
economic
qui ont tendance
actors
à défendre
that
d'autres
have
visions et d'autres
a
schémas
lot of
pour
power,
l'agriculture.
who present a
Plus
different
concrètement,
vision of agriculture.
je peux donner
So
quelques
more
exemples au niveau de la région
concretely, I can
européenne,
give a few
la Campesina
examples
Europe.
for the European
Bon, c'est
region.
assez particulier, hein, c'est aussi pour faire le
It's
lien sur les questions
a
coloniales dont on parlait,
very
assez injuste, que
specific
l'Union européenne,
situation.
de même que certains pays d'Amérique du
The
Nord ou du Nord,
and
subventionnent
North
fortement son
American
agriculture à travers de la politique
countries
agricole commune. Il y a des milliards et des
subsidize
milliards
their
d'euros qui sont dépensés
agriculture
chaque année
at
pour
very
le soutien
high
à l'agriculture
levels,
européenne, selon des schémas de répartition
according
des aides qui
to
sont
schemes
malheureusement souvent
of
relativement peu clairs et en tout cas peu équitables. Mais bon, c'est quand même une aide qui est non
support
négligeable.
schemes that
Voilà,
are
ça c'est un premier exemple. Alors,
often
malheureusement,
unequal. So that is a first example
mais c'est quelque chose qui
of
nous semble très
the
important. Et du coup,
inequities
la
that
question,
seems
c'est pas de dire
important.
que
And
vous devez
the
arrêter ça chez nous, ça serait plutôt de dire qu'il faudrait permettre
other
aux
question
pays
would
dits des
be
Sud de faire la même chose chez eux, c'est-à-dire
to
de
allow
d'aider leurs agriculteurs
the global
avec des
south
taxes
to
aux
do the
frontières pour
same, to
protéger leurs agriculteurs,
subsidize
avec
agriculture
des
in
politiques de développement
their
rural et
countries
agricole dans leur pays
through
pour
sustainable
permettre de développer
development
la paysannerie
policies
locale, les
and
marchés
to
locaux, la
support local
transformation,
peasants
etc.,
and
etc. Ce
agricultures,
qui est
local
aujourd'hui interdit au
markets,
nom
and
d'accords de
etc., which
libre-échange et
is forbidden
d'organisations mondiales du
today
commerce, tout
in the
simplement des
name
règles
of
de
a
commerce
free
mondial qui,
trade
soi-disant,
and
interdisent cela. C'est quand même un petit peu
etc.,
le
who
comble d'interdire aux pays du Sud et que
forbid
les pays
it.
du Nord le
So
fassent. Mais bon,
it
ça fait
we
partie
allow
de
it
l'injustice des
in
règles
our countries,
internationales.
but not
Donc
in
voilà,
the
c'est une première
global
chose sur
south.
laquelle
So
il faut
that
défendre,
is
c'est de
part
dire
of
qu'il nous faut des
the
politiques publiques
global
puissantes,
inequities that
efficaces,
we
fortes dans les
face.
États. Et pour ça, il faut donner la possibilité aux États de mener ces politiques.
So we need
Et
to
donc, il
give the
faut arrêter tout
possibility
ce
to
qui est
the
accord de
states to
libre-échange,
support
OMC, etc.
the
Parce que
agriculture. So we need to
toutes ces règles
stop
commerciales internationales empêchent finalement les
supporting
États
these
de
free
mettre en place
trade
des politiques
agreements
essentielles
who
dans leur pays.
forbid
Voilà, un autre
countries
exemple que je peux
to
donner au niveau de l'Europe,
establish
c'est qu'il y a une
essential
loi qui
solutions
est
in their
passée au
country.
niveau européen et
In
qui a été
Europe,
approuvée
there
dans
was a
certains États, dont
law that was
l'Espagne,
just
sur ce qu'ils appellent les pratiques
passed
commerciales
on
injustes.
what they
Et
call
qui part du constat que les
unjust
paysans souvent gagnent très
commercial
peu d'argent sur ce qu'ils vendent et que tous les bénéfices
practices
sont capturés
where
par les
the
entreprises qui font la
agricultures, the
transformation ou la
peasants
distribution.
receive
Et du coup, là,
very
c'était une
little
loi qui avait
income
pour but
and the money
d'interdire
is
finalement d'acheter les
taken by
produits à un prix
the
trop bas
marketing. So
et de
to
respecter finalement
forbid
un prix
the
minimum un
buying
petit
of
peu
the
pour les
products at
agriculteurs
a very low price,
qui
so
produisent
to
des aliments.
establish a
Voilà, donc c'est un
minimum
début, cette loi n'est
price
pas encore appliquée,
for the
en tout cas
produce.
très peu de
Now,
pays ont décidé de la mettre en œuvre,
very
mais
few
voilà, ça fait
countries
partie au niveau
have
européen
decided
des luttes qu'on
to
va mener pour
implement
essayer
it, but
d'obtenir
this is an
l'application
example
concrète du soit pour
of
permettre
the
aux
solutions
paysans
that
d'avoir un
can
revenu used to allow agricultures and peasants to have a decent income. So one of the things that could allow younger peasants to enter the sector is to allow them to have a decent wage. The income at the moment is very low, so it becomes very difficult for people to enter the sector.
Thank you, Jean, for elevating the need for democratic control over policy processes and the problems of global inequities with regard to governments around the world being able to subsidize their agriculture and reach national food self-sufficiency, which is often blocked by WTO rules. And so, yeah, you really elevated the importance of stopping free trade agreements and the need for fair pricing through parity and living wages for workers and peasants. And so we're going to pass it over to Islanda. If you could maybe address some of these points at your local level, like how is your struggle in Haiti for food sovereignty ultimately a struggle against neoliberalism and neocolonialism? Islanda?
Thank you, Tyler. Thank you, Jean, for your comments. I will just add a few things. We have to say that facing the environmental crisis that is threatening humanity, food sovereignty becomes more essential than ever. Today, as you know, there are existential threats against humanity: climate crisis, the loss of biodiversity, the destruction of the land, the pollution of water and air has an impact on all our ecosystems, but in particular, the global South countries are more deeply affected, like in Haiti here. These environmental crises are intimately linked to the development of industrial capitalism, extractivism, imperialism from the beginning of the 19th century, and is part of the global project for agriculture around the world. And if we also see the multiplication of these said natural crises like droughts, floods, forest fires, and etc., that are affecting a huge part of humanity who decided to choose modernity and impose technology and science. And now what we're facing is the impacts of this. We understand, of course, that we can't ignore science and technology. Obviously, technology and science are very important for peasants, but it has to be with dignity and equality that doesn't affect our lands. Often facing the environmental crisis, only food sovereignty can truly bring a sustainable solution. So the pillars of the fight for food sovereignty that we have taken in Via Campesina since the very beginning. Via Campesina has been talking about food sovereignty for over 30 years now. We say that the fight of the peasants and our allies to resist to the threat of multinationals on our food system is essential for humanity, and it is undeniable. Facing also a situation that is becoming critical with the climate crisis, we must protect small-scale agriculture and the peasants who are an absolute necessity. This needs to be done through improvements and new public policies at the local, national, and international levels. We also need to be able to have access to management of the markets and to access to a generational renewal of peasants, which is also one of the fights that Via Campesina has. We as youth wouldn't be able to be here talking about food sovereignty if we don't have the base of what Via Campesina has already been able to offer us. And to promote food sovereignty in the face of capitalism, there's also an importance to fight for a dignity of peasants and to put in place integral agricultural reforms and access to land. We also need to put in place a new international framework in order to move away from imperialism, from the savage imperialism that imposes its system to us, and also to move away from neoliberalism and to guarantee the right of people to food and the right of peasants, so that our youth in Via Campesina, so that the young peasants of the world have access to a better life for the survival of our planet and for the survival of humanity. Only food sovereignty will liberate us.
Thank you, Islanda. Jessie, I'm going to pass it over to you. If you could please pick up on this point about in our fight against neoliberalism, like what are some of these public policies that are needed to create enabling environments for young people, for us to be able to participate directly in policy making, for us to have our right to food and land realized? Jessie?
Yeah, thanks, Tyler. And I guess I'm kind of building off what Islanda had mentioned about the fact that ultimately we need a narrative shift and a policy shift away from export fundamentalism and corporate profit, and towards food sovereignty and just agriculture systems. So I think we need to find dynamic advocacy strategies really to garner public support for young and new farmers in order to be heard by policymakers who at this point are beholden to commodity farms, to international trade agreements. And this seems like a lofty goal, but there are lots of tangible policy changes that can advance this goal. The struggle is just having policymakers actually listen to what we need. So I'll focus on farmland access and affordability, since that's what I've already touched on. And over the last couple of years, a number of NFU youth members have compiled a number of policy recommendations that we highlighted in a report, which I can share in the chat. So with regard to land access and affordability, the first recommendation that we discussed was to develop, in consultation with farmers of all ages, a national succession strategy. So we need to push for an urgent forum to get this process underway, both at the regional and national level. We desperately need to fund and support the development of land linking and land matching programs. These currently exist in 2 Canadian provinces already, but they aren't across the country. And we have to ensure that these programs support the needs of newcomers and of urban youth as well. Another policy recommendation would be to fund and support the development of farmland trusts and land banks that can acquire and hold farmland, then lease it out to farmers or sell it back to farmers in order to take it out of the speculative market. There used to be a very successful and quite huge land bank in Saskatchewan, which was called the Saskatchewan Land Bank. Saskatchewan is a province in the Canadian prairies. Unfortunately, due to many government changes, this no longer exists, but it's a good example of where we could actually revert back to this. And in addition to that, also reinstating and supporting community pastures. A few other recommendations that we had discussed were limiting the size of investment acquisitions and limiting non-agricultural development, which some municipalities across the country have successfully done, although there is a fight happening in Ontario right now, which is Canada's most populous province, to preserve farmland around the major city or the major urban area of Toronto. So it's not guaranteed, and we need to have more strength behind these policies that are protecting farmland. And finally, I think that we need to really develop these sorts of land reserves in every province and territory that prioritize both intergenerational family land transfers and non-family transfers, and that promote agroecological practices. Again, these do seem like kind of long-term goals, but this is the kind of thinking shift that has to happen in our policy spaces. And in order to do that, we need to organize really well at the grassroots level in order to not only gain the ear of the policymakers, but to actually garner more public support. And that's kind of the two-pronged approach that in Canada right now, the youth are in the NFU are contemplating. Thank you, Jessie.
Qammar, let's pass it over to you. So Jessie just noted that in La Via Campesina and many of our member organizations, agroecology is a model for us to transition away from industrial agriculture. So if you could talk to us a little bit about peasant agroecology and how it's an urgent alternative that we're presenting. Thank you. Qammar?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Tyler. Today we are facing a global a battle, I think, for countryside between the model of death of the capitalist system and its arms in finance, agribusiness, and industrial agriculture, mining, the business of water and seeds, and our model of life, as Jessie mentioned, that is based on agroecological peasant agriculture. And I think agroecology is a way of life of our people that is in harmony with the language of nature, and it is a paradigm shift in the social, political, productive, and economic relations in our territories that will transform the way we produce and consume food and store a socio-cultural reality devastated by industrial food production. And agroecology is only way that generates local knowledge, builds social justice, promotes identity and culture, and strengthens the economic viability of rural and urban areas. And we recognize agroecology, we as LVC recognize agroecology to be the way of life in which we materialize our way of life and produce an abundance of healthy and affordable food for all humanity, food for life. And we denounce the attempts to co-opt agroecology for capitalist ends and the theft and privatization of our knowledge and seeds through intellectual property rights and other such policies. That is a theft of our seeds and local knowledge. And as we are facing nowadays the urgent contemporary challenges, we are showing agroecological peasant agriculture on all our continents in direct relationships from peasant to peasant in our territories. And with deep love for our way of life, we have created dozens of peasant schools and training and formation processes in agroecology, both based on both formal and informal education in all continents. These schools and processes, which always combine technical and political formation in horizontal processes based on dialogue between knowledges and exchange of experiences, constitute a force in our territories, providing our communities with the tools needed for the collective transformation of our realities. And I think agroecology is a political subject. It requires us to challenge and transform structure of power in society. We need to put the control of seeds, biodiversity, land and territories, water, knowledge, culture, and commons in the hands of people who feed the world. And agroecology is only radical space for young people to contribute to the social and economic transformation that is underway in many of our societies. Agroecology must create a territorial and social dynamic that creates opportunities for rural youth and values women's leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, Qammar. Our time, unfortunately, is running short. In 5 minutes, we need to switch over to the other room for the 30 minutes of question and answer with the audience members. We're receiving some questions already in the chat, and we ask that everybody in the audience continues to submit your questions. And if you want a specific speaker to address it, please indicate who you would like to respond to your question. So unfortunately, we don't really have much time to go too far into depth. So maybe 1 minute each. We need to go hard at, over to the other room in 5 minutes. So Islanda, if I can pass it over to you, do you have any final words before we move over to the question and answer? Anything that you would like to respond to that anyone has said? Islanda, you're on mute.
I'm sorry, I apologize. Before we leave, I wanted to say that in the present context in which we live, we as the youth in Via Campesina we really strive to denounce the threats of agribusiness and the threat it represents on indigenous agriculture and youth and peasants, and the threat on the environment. Now, on the term of the declaration brought forth by Via Campesina after years of struggle in the UN for this document that is the Declaration of the Rights of Peasants in the world, not only peasants, but all those who live in rural areas. I have to say that we have this huge responsibility of continuing with the struggle, continuing to fight and to work on advocacy at a global level so that the peasants and agricultures of the world fight for a global well-being in order to stop this threat that is neoliberalism, capitalism, and etc. So thank you to each of you. I was very happy to be able to be here with you, and together we will continue on this global project of changing the system.
Thank you, Islanda. Jean, do you have anything that you would like to note before we move over to the question and answer?
Oui, bien sûr. Alors juste, on va en profiter pour faire un petit test, voir si la traduction maintenant
I just want to make sure that everything is working when it comes to the interpretation. There seems to have been some technical issues with my computer previously. Can you all hear the interpretation?
Yes, I hear very well.
Ok, parfait. Bon, il y a un problème avec Zoom. Oui, bah du coup, désolé pour ceux qui n'ont pas bien entendu avant.
I apologize for those who weren't able to hear
people saying they
previously.
still have the issue of hearing double voice in the French booth. I don't know why. Should I speak English? Okay, I will speak English then. Yeah, sorry for the translation issue that we had before. I guess my Zoom was outdated or something, linking with the technology issues I was talking about. Anyway, just to conclude, a very short phrase about international solidarity. So to say that in the past 2 months, years, I've heard more and more in local organization that people are reluctant or sometimes just asking questions about the interest of working on the international level, because institutions are very difficult to influence and transnational companies have a lot of power in these spaces. But I do believe that well, especially because transnational companies are using these international spaces to push forward their vision of farming and of the future, it's even more important for us to be there also to propose a counter narrative and to propose other options and opportunities and another future for people on the planet. So it's often very difficult. We often feel really small and useless and not listened to, but I still think that it's really important for us to be there. And as Micherline was saying, the UNRWA is a very good example of what we can achieve when we work all together for a vision that we have of what we want as people and as a planet. And I think this UNRWA declaration is not only a legal tool that we can use to defend ourselves really concretely on trials or against companies, it's also something that's really worth because it unites us. It's a project that we all have and that we can all share. And so it's a link between farmers from every country and every continent on this planet. And that's, I think, something really, well, full of hope and full of interest. And yeah, and I think we should sometimes more work on these alternatives that we want to propose to be more in an optimistic part of the fight against the capitalist system. Thank you.